So you're evangelizing at Canva. Yep. You realize the importance of evangelizing and across the organization. But I want to understand why you in your career right now, you're building out your own podcast.
Yeah.
You're building out your own community. Because that is something that you're doing for yourself. So,
yes.
So walk us through why that's important.
Okay, so there's two answers to that. There's the high road and the low road. You know what I mean?
Both. Let's hear both.
Okay, so the high road is over the course of 30 or 40 years, I've been very fortunate to make a lot of relationships, gain a lot of visibility. So I have achieved a position where I have the context and the connections to create a podcast like I have. I am an active listener of podcasts, and most podcasts have guests. And so I looked at that. I said, wow, Guy, Jane Goodall, you can get to Margaret Atwood, Bob Cialdini, Sean Thompson, Woz, Stephen Wolfram. I mean, these are remarkable people. So you could interview them about their remarkableness, how they got there, what they did, their advice, their takes on certain issues. I just released a podcast about Leon Panetta, and Leon Panetta was Secretary of Defense, Director of the CIA, Chief of Staff of Bill Clinton. He knows a few things about politics. He can help you interpret what's going on right now. So the high road was I figured out that I have the context and the connections, and now the time to create a podcast where I can really get remarkable people on record and to preserve their wisdom for posterity. So that's the high road. The low road is I've been making 50 to 75 speeches a year, which means 50 to 75 trips per year, which means, one trip per week on average. And I am just sick of traveling. And so when I came out with my latest book, Wise Guy, I was on the other side of these kind of things. I was the interviewee as opposed to the interviewer. And so I would talk to these people like, what's your business model? Well, I sell ads. How many ads do you sell? Well, one at the start, one in the middle, one in the end. And how much do you get for these ads? Oh, I get 20,000 for the first one, 15,000 for the second one, and 5,000 for the third one. So I'm not that mathematical, but I can add 20 and 15 and 5 and get 40. So I got 40,000 per episode. I said, now how many episodes do you do? Between 100 and 150 a year. So now I can multiply 40,000 times 100 and get 4 million. And I said, so you're telling me you're making at best case, even if you're lying to me, 4 million, I divide that in half, that's 2 million. So even if you're lying to me by a factor of 2, you're making 2 million. If you're lying to me by a factor of 4, you're making 1 million. So why am I getting my ass on the plane 52 times a year and you're just, doing podcasts without much travel and making either 1, 2, or 4 million bucks? So I said, I'm going to be a podcaster. I'm not going to be a public speaker anymore. So that's the low road reason.
It's not a low road. It's smart. Because if you're going to, so this is going to segue into really where I wanted to drive this home, because people are in their career. I work a 9 to 5. So I manage a sales team, a software sales team. And this is something that I'm doing as a passion project. And that, it really doesn't take a lot to build something that you're an expert in, that you can do on the side. And you don't have to be you're not going to get the Jane Goodalls or, that level of access. I think you interviewed Arianna Huffington. That level of access is obviously reserved for people that have sort of built out themselves in their career and they're at a certain point. It doesn't mean you don't get.
I'm an instant success. It only took 40 years.
Only 40 years. They don't see the 40 years. I have to, I just asked you, how many downloads is your podcast getting? And obviously it ramped up much quicker than most other people to start, but you've put years into this. So I think that but still you recognize that it's an easy thing to do. It's still a low labor.
Well, that's a whole nother
relative to.
I thought it would be easy to do. It's not that easy. I mean, there's no free lunch in the world. So I don't know about you, but when I interview, I have such a diversity. So I interview Jane Goodall, I have to understand chimpanzees. I interview Bob Cialdini, I have to understand social psychology. I interview Leon Panetta, I have to understand international relations and politics and Congress and government. And I interview Sean Thompson, I have to understand surfing. Well, that I kind of had that. And then I interview Christy Yamaguchi. Well, I'm not a big Olympic figure skater, so I figured out Olympic figure skating. So there's, I think, 4 or 5 hours per interview prep. There's 1 hour of the interview itself, and then I get the transcript back and the first pass of the audio. I think there's another 4 or 5 hours of editing of that I do. And
that's
then
the editing and the post.
Yeah, and then I give it to a sound designer, and he probably puts another 4 or 5 hours into it. And so now we have a finished product. And then the hard part begins, believe it or not, because the hard part is getting the word out, and you got to use social media and MailChimp and newsletter episodes and live video conferencing, and holy shit, I mean,
webinars, all that stuff.
It might be easier to get on a plane 52 times a year.
I think the whole point is, though, to start. Like, that's really, like, I encourage everyone to just start, because you put a lot of love. You put a lot of love into this.
Yeah.
You put a lot more love than a lot of people put into their podcast.
You think?
You put more love into it. I think so. I think so. I think also the more you do it, the easier it is to remove a little bit of that prep, because you know the questions that are going to come up, and you can guide people down, agnostic of what they do.
Well,
you want to be a little bit educated, but yeah, I think that it comes I think it gets a little bit easier. I hope it gets a little bit easier.
Well, how many episodes have you done?
So this is so is it 20?
Okay, so
20.
I'm at about 13, and I will tell you though that I have obviously been on this side, right? And so I know when somebody truly knows who I am and somebody truly doesn't. And so, you can ask 5 or 6. So, what was your career path? What was the secret to your success? And then it's obvious. What was it like working for Steve Jobs? So I know when they looked at my Wikipedia entry, but I also know when they've done a deep dive. And so when I do a deep dive, let's take someone like Jane Goodall. So when you interview Jane Goodall, if you want to show her that you've done a deep dive, you have to say to her, well, tell me how, without a bachelor's degree, Louis Leakey helped you get a PhD at Oxford. So you didn't have any undergraduate degree and you got a PhD because Louis Leakey helped you. Okay, so that's not something that might be too obvious, although that is in her Wikipedia entry. But, that's a kind of a detail. And so I don't think most people interviewing Jane Goodall would ask her, like, how'd you get a PhD without an undergraduate degree? And when you ask Leon Panetta, when you're interviewing Leon Panetta, everybody's asking him about being in the sit room at Osama bin Laden and all that. But I try to ask him, so let's look at, I hope you know who these people are, but let's look at James Mattis and John Kelly. So John Kelly was the chief of staff for Trump. James Mattis was Secretary of Defense. Both Marine generals. They lasted a couple, 3 years, and then they were fired or left or, whatever, resigned. So I asked Leon, so I said, how do I interpret that? Do I look at it and say, well, were they complicit? Is the attitude, well, I only worked for Trump 2 or 3 years. I'm not a bad guy. I left after 2 or 3 years. But, you could make the case that's like saying, well, I only worked for Hitler for 2 or 3 years, man. I wasn't that bad a guy. I left after 2 years. Well, you can believe that. On the other hand, I said to Leon, so Leon, tell me, is it that, or is it these guys were patriotic Americans? They sacrificed. They went to work for someone they probably didn't ideologically agree with because they loved their country and they thought they could prevent disaster from the inside. Which way do I look at that, Leon? And so that's not something you just read Wikipedia and you come up with. So I don't know. There's a whole diatribe about how hard it is to ask good questions, I guess.
Now, let me ask you this. Now I feel like all my questions are under the microscope, so you got me sweating, but that's fine.
And do this again, yeah.
No, it's good. It's good. I like it. I actually really like where this is going. So do you find as a marketer, you think that there's more value in delivering that granular content? Or do you think that to to scale the podcast and to get it and get as many people interested as possible, knowing that the people that you're speaking to, people already don't have an idea of what, like, they haven't gone on their Wikipedia. So does it make sense to get that granular, or does it make more sense to stay high level? And what's better commercially?
Listen, when I have 2.5 million followers or episodes downloaded, or 2.5 million copies of each episode are downloaded, I will tell you. The answer is I don't know. I mean, maybe everybody asks those kind of simple, easy questions because that's what everybody wants to hear. So I don't know, of the people who listened to Leon Panetta's episode, I don't know how many were wondering, so yes, how should I think of John Kelly and James Mattis? That probably never occurred to 99.9% of the people. But then, isn't that what makes Terry Gross a great interviewer? Isn't that what makes a great 60 Minutes interviewer great? Not that they ask the softballs.